it's Gabi Koyenov, and welcome to another video. In today's video, I'm going to be discussing my experience working as a teacher in a Hasidic school. In addition, I'm going to comment on the recent New York Times article titled, "In Hasidic Enclaves, Failing Private Schools Flush with Public Money." And I have a lot of thoughts. So the reason I'm making this video is because I want to kind of spread a sense of understanding. I think that there is just a lot of misunderstanding between any kind of community and a Hasidic community, especially a kind of Hasidic community, because it's even more insular than other Orthodox communities, with the exception of Chabad, of course, which is also Hasidic, but is very different from other Hasidic communities. And truthfully, I am not even the right person to be making this video. I'm not Hasidic, and I don't really know so much about Hasidic culture aside for the fact that I taught in a Hasidic school for a year. So I'm going to be sticking mostly to my experience teaching at the Hasidic school and talking over the experiences that I've had with Hasidic friends and getting into a conversation about that. But in general, I'm not the right person to be talking about a Hasidic community in an in-depth fashion. I am the right type of person to talk about a Sephardi community and the Yeshivish community because those have been communities that I've been involved with for decades. In those other videos I made about those communities, I think that I do have a good grasp. I think I would be, like, my experience and opinion on the communities are valid and reliable in a really meaningful sense of the word. Whereas in the Hasidic community, I was just there for 1 year. I have a few Hasidic friends. Like, what do I really know? And secondly, it's just another video that I hope to make, which I hope will be entertaining. And will just get my foot a little bit more in the door with YouTube. And hopefully I can make this a little bit controversial and be able to handle feedback, because that's really what I'm looking to do. I want to expand my personality and my presence on YouTube and be able to expand myself, because I have big plans for the future. And I need practice, so that's we're making videos like this, and I do feel like it does have value, of course, otherwise I wouldn't be making them, but it's ultimately, I don't want to be commenting on the Jewish world and things like that. I want to be doing something totally different. For now, I think that I have a lot to say about the Jewish world, so I'm making videos on it, but long term, I just will be changing gears, and hopefully it will be exciting. So I started working in a Hasidic school in 2020, and I worked there for a year. And I got this job through Title I. And Title I is basically a government organization that they send teachers to, I guess, underprivileged schools. And the Hasidic schools obviously count for that. I was doing that while I was pursuing my master's in marriage and family therapy and professional clinical counseling. So I needed money while I was in college, and Title I offered me the job. And all I was required to have was a bachelor's degree. I think they will hire other people if you don't have a bachelor's degree, but I had a bachelor's degree and that was considered good enough. You also need 2 years of teaching experience. And I didn't have a bachelor's in education. I had a bachelor's in Talmudic law and Judaic studies. And so I wasn't, like, technically qualified to teach as a professional teacher, but I mean, it's teaching 7th grade math and English, which pretty much anyone is qualified to do. So I don't even know why you would need a degree. I think maybe a teacher's training course would be useful, just so that you know how to deal with class and misbehavior and everything. But yeah, it's 7th grade English and math, and no degree or education is required in my personal opinion. But anyways, so I had that job, and it paid $50 a session. So $50 for 45 minutes. Just to talk about Title I for a second, I absolutely loved working for them. They paid me very well. I think they paid me a lot better than any other job would have paid somebody in my position, being 23 years old and no actual qualification for anything. You know, bachelor's in Talmudic law is like having a bachelor's in philosophy or whatever. You can't really get a job with that. I was lucky to have it. Anyway, so I worked with 2 classes of 12 kids. And I had an amazing first experience. I think that it's, like, kind of shocking. If you're a teacher for the first time in your life and you're walking into a classroom, which it really was, the teaching experience that I had prior to working in the Hasidic school was in various mentorship programs where we ran groups and, like, maybe, like, tutoring stuff. So it wasn't like a real classroom teaching experience. It was more like assistant stuff in way smaller levels, working with 2 or 3 kids, not with a big group of 12. So that was much more of a real classroom experience, and it was fun. It was exciting. These kids kept me on my toes every day, which I loved a lot. And I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty of the details. Okay, so as I was saying, one of my first experiences, which was absolutely hilarious, was a coordinated effort with the class. A kid asked me a question to, I think like a math question, and I came over to help him. And all of a sudden, next thing I know, they pulled up a chair behind me and pushed me onto the chair, and they started singing and dancing and lifting the chair up. And that was just hilarious as like an experience. Like imagine you're coming in as a teacher for the first time. You have no idea what you're doing. This is all totally new to you, and then like that happens. So these kids kept me on my toes. Also, the class time that we had in English was an hour and a half. I believe it was from 4 to 5:30, and I'm not sure if they had additional English before then. They might have, but I wouldn't be surprised also if it was just that class for an hour and a half, and that was it. Okay, so the first point that I want to make about working with the Hasidim is that these kids were extremely happy in a very unexpected way. In addition to being really happy, they were also incredibly innocent and pure. And just to give you an example of that, like to talk, like to even say the letter F, like they'd be like, oh my gosh, like F, like, hinting to like the F word. It would be like, just for them, a total like shocker to even say that letter. And it's like cursing. I've never heard these kids curse. I've never heard these kids talk inappropriately about girls and or anything like that. And now I'm working in another school as a school counselor, as a therapist. And, these kids are great kids, but there's a clear difference between a kid that has been exposed to the secular world and the way that we have it today, where there is nothing these kids wouldn't say. Like they've heard it all the inappropriate things that you could possibly think of. These 10-year-old kids are aware of things. I'm not going to give an example just because of how like just kind of gross and like grotesque it probably is. But like when you hear like a 10-year-old kind of talking about a girl in an objective way, meaning like treating her like an object, not speaking about her objectively, and it's just like you're 10 years old, like what do you even know about that? And it's just there. It's so normal in our society and so pervasive in the kinds of music that's out there and the movies and shows and like what they do. And it's just, it becomes normal for these kids to kind of like know these things that they really should not be knowing. And it's refreshing going to a Hasidic community and seeing kids acting like kids. And that's kind of like how it's supposed to be. Now with the internet and all these kids having unfiltered smart devices, it's whatever. It's a whole other conversation for another video, but I'm personally very against that. I think parents need to filter their children's devices and not allow them to have access to really explicit, inappropriate music, inappropriate movies, inappropriate shows, and just pornography, to be frank. These kids have exposure to that stuff and they're looking at it. You know what I mean? These kids are, it's really terrible what's happening in our society at large with kids. Parents need to stop being ignorant, and frankly, we also all need to stop being ignorant. My devices are filtered. I'm an adult. All adults should have filtered devices. That is my hot, hard, and fast take. I think we need to stop acting like children and stop being naive and filter our devices for us and for our children. Period. There is no excuse. Do it today if you have not done that. But anyways, the kids are... Sorry about that rant. The kids are innocent. They have no exposure to any of this kind of internet in the secular world. They don't listen to secular music. They don't watch any movies. They don't even read secular books. And I'm going to get more into that. So there's a sense of like innocence where kids are supposed to be kids. And it's fascinating because you would think, what, no video games? No Pokemon cards? No, I don't know. Whatever. But the kids, they go out, they ride their bike, they throw a ball around. They don't even play sports, actually. I don't know why they don't play sports, but they don't play soccer or basketball, at least in the Hasidic school that I was working in. I was working in Vishnitz, which is a very Hasidic school. It's about as Hasidic as you get. So, yeah, they didn't play any sports or anything like that. I'm not sure why. I'd imagine it's probably because they'd associate sports like soccer or basketball as like Goyish, meaning non-Jewish. It's just something a Jewish person doesn't involve themselves in. So, which is a concept. The Hasidim like to keep their community incredibly insular. So anything that brings a person closer to the secular world it's considered not okay. Whereas other Orthodox Jews, they don't necessarily have that kind of boundary. There are a lot of things that other Orthodox Jews will consider Goyish and therefore not do, but the line is much farther to the left than a very stringent, like hard Hasidish, like anything that could remotely be considered Gaish, they basically consider it Gaish. Like sports, for example. And yeah, so the kids were happy, and they played, and they had a really strong, beautiful sense of innocence. And just to give you an example of how happy and like just pure-hearted these kids kind of were, there were many days when we started the class singing and dancing. You know, we would dance a hora, and we would just sing, and, you know, sing these Hasidic songs, these nigunim, and just dance. And, like, you know, there would be a kid table drumming, and we would just dance in the class. And there were many, many, many days where we started the class like that. Now, part of the reason they did that was not just because they were so happy, but it was because they were resistant to class, which is the next point that I'm going to get to, about how the kids are just very resistant to secular education, even English and math. They were incredibly, incredibly resistant to that. And we'll get into it and discuss why I think they were, and whether it's good or bad, and whether it's abnormal, because all kids are resistant to school to some degree. Kids just don't want to be in school. Even in the non-Hasidic school that I'm working in now, the kids don't want to be there. You know, I think even when you have a teacher that is somehow motivates the kids, which is rare, that's a very amazing skill to have a teacher that's able to like really motivate kids. I never had that in my teaching ability. I think I was very likable as a teacher because I was like chill and I was a cool guy. So the kids liked me a lot, but I didn't know how to motivate the kids. You know, that was something very different. I think I have some tips that I've learned. I think making a raffle every day is very helpful, and then maybe an even bigger raffle at the end of the week where you're giving out tickets, and if the kids do a good job, they earn a ticket. But that also gets complicated because then you have boys that are not so strong in the class, and you can't not give them tickets just because they're not doing schoolwork. They're good kids. You feel bad. You have a heart, you know. But the way to do it is, like, you have to be strict, like loving and caring, but strict, and you have to give tickets and be like, look, I'm sorry, I know you're crying right now because you didn't do the math work and you're not getting a ticket when everyone else is getting a ticket, and you're not going to be in the raffle today, and that's really terrible, but next time you got to do the math work. You really need to stick to your guns as a teacher. I was never able to stick to my guns. You know, I was weak. The kid would cry, I would give him a ticket. But anyways, the reason they actually were just able to break into song and dance is because that happiness was there and underlying. So if it wouldn't have been there, they wouldn't have danced. They would have just, I don't know, made some other trouble. And they very much tried to give a lot of trouble and drive me up a wall, which they did many times. But, you know, I never got upset. I think like one time I actually got really mad at a kid, and he was just kind of like really being annoying, and I didn't really do anything. I just got really really upset to myself. And usually, as soon as I would start getting annoyed, if I had to get it, if something had to happen, I would call the principal, and he oh my gosh, this principal had an electricity. He would just walk into a room and like stare, and like the kids would just be absolutely quiet. And it's hilarious because he was actually like a really nice guy when I would like talk with him. I wouldn't imagine him having that kind of electricity, but he really had that. And I think he was actually a good example of somebody that had that hardcore like discipline. Like, he would be strict when he needed to be strict, but he was really a very like loving, caring person. He really cared about the kids a lot. He was a really good person, honestly, a good role model, I think, for me as an educational professional. But whatever, my goal was never to stay in education. I really wanted to become a therapist, which is what I did. And I love my job now. I'm incredibly happy that I have this job. It's the best job in the world. I'm going to make a future video describing my journey becoming a therapist and what it's actually like being a therapist, especially working in a school as a therapist, which I think is way better than working in an office. Not an office, I'm sorry, working in my own practice or whatever, for now. Yeah, so as I was saying, I think the overall vibe of working in the school was, you wouldn't think that the kids would be so happy because they're so limited. They don't even play sports. Like, for recess, they would just throw a ball around the room and we would play chess. You know, I got the kids a lot more into chess. There were some kids actually that enjoyed reading. There are these like Hasidic books, and kids would like take a book and they would read it during recess. I think I don't remember if it was like, there were probably books in Yiddish, but I think like even English Yiddish books, but that was a little bit more rare. There were a few kids that read leisurely, but, you know, to be honest, like, looking at the books that are like approved in these Hasidic circles, they're generally not interesting. You know, they're just generally very lame and boring books. But I don't know, kids enjoy them, I guess. And just in general, the vibe of the kids is a vibe of resisting a secular education, and they feel it very strongly. Of course, that kind of perspective is coming from the top down. They're getting that perspective from their parents, from their rabbis, and just from their Hasidic society. But at the end of the day, they also feel it very strongly. It's not like they're just submissively following along it. They really feel that it's wrong to learn secular things. And part of the reason also is because Hasidim have very strong values and purpose of life. Like that idea of like getting close to God in the unique Hasidic way is something that's just, it's so inbuilt in the community. And these kids, they were young. They were 12 years old. 12 and 13 were the kids that I was teaching. And it was actually their last year of secular studies. They would be 13 by the end of the year, and it was their last year. I think for most, if not all of them, that was their last year of English studies. And to be honest, the kids, there were a good amount of kids that probably had learning disabilities like dyslexia. Just in general, they were not good readers. They didn't like reading. A good amount of them. I want to say probably like 30% had like struggles reading and writing. Like a good 30%, like real struggles. You know what I mean? More of them had struggles with writing than reading, probably. I think all of them knew the basics. Like they knew the alphabet. They could read a word literally. Writing was more of a struggle. But I think when I get into the article, the New York Times article, I'm going to comment more on this. I think the New York Times article blew it a little bit out of proportion. I think like them showing you that none of the kids could read or write, it's not really true. There were a lot of kids, I want to say probably 50%, that were like at probably grade level, like what you would expect an 8th grader to be able to read. Maybe not half, maybe half is being a little bit generous, but like, yeah, like probably at least half the class, like they literally could read and write. Like they could. They also could do basic math. At least half the class, if not more, could do very basic math. Now, if we're talking about algebra, they would be totally unprepared to do algebra. As far as sciences and history goes, they have a very filtered version of science. History, less so. I don't think there's anything against history. I think especially Jewish history, they have a good grasp of. And the Hasidic community, I think, also very heavily still holds the Holocaust and the horrors of the Holocaust and the traumas with them. So there is a distrust of the government, a very natural distrust that I think is more by Hasidim than any other Orthodox community. And I think part of the reason is because they like, I think the Holocaust was so much at the foundation of developing the Hasidic community as it is today. That's what a friend told me yesterday when I spoke with him, actually, in preparation for this video. A lot of the older Hasidim in the past few generations, like that, the Holocaust was like, they were still traumatized from the horrors of Europe and everything that they had gone through. And they were so focused on like rebuilding and you can imagine what that would do to a community and to, to the individuals. And it's just terrible what we went through and what any, it's really a shocker. But at the end of the day, that's kind of like at the base of their experience. I think they're justified in having that. It's a slow healing process, and a lot of the trauma is kind of accepted as, I don't know how to put that. I might just edit all of this out, but yeah. So the kids are extremely resistant because they feel that there's a different purpose to life, meaning secular education is just not in line with their purpose. And the fact of the matter is, a lot of them will get married young and they'll have a lot of kids. And if they become an accountant, for example, or something else that's paying 60 to 100 grand, it's not really supporting their family of 10 kids. So a lot of Hasidim go into businesses, and typically they're pretty successful. There are Hasidic grocery stores and Hasidim that are starting their own businesses and who knows what, and Amazon packaging and in all sorts of things that you could imagine. There are Hasidim involved in whatever type of business. And the kids in the school that I was in, a lot of their parents were very well off. They had one kid's father or grandfather, I think, owned a grape juice company, another kid's supermarket, and just things. They were very well to do. I remember, I think there was more than one kid in my class that their dad owned a Tesla or whatever, a Tesla Model X, which is very impressive. So they're doing well, and I think when they have that mindset of like, okay, I'm going into import-export as an adult, my father has an in for me to get into this business, and I could get into this business with him and do this job and make a lot of money. What do I need an actual high school education for? I'm not planning on going to college. So that's the mindset of a lot of them, where it's just like, of course you need to make money in life, but they don't buy into the secular way of doing it, which is like, going to school, going to college, and getting yourself a normal career. They buy into a very different lifestyle where it's much more business oriented. So that is good when people are successful. Now, obviously, business is difficult. People can fail in business, and it does happen. And when that does happen, there's a very good Hasidic support network, like a fallback network. Nobody, from my understanding, is going homeless and needing to live on the streets with their kids or whatever. That does not happen. Nobody's going hungry. There are Hasidic organizations that give food to people, that help pay rent or mortgages or whatever. I don't exactly know. I've never needed to use the services, but this is what my Hasidic friends have told me. They have a very good network. I asked them if they think it's sustainable, and they said absolutely, because the Hasidic economy is growing. So even if it continues to fail, there's just more and more money to be able to support people. Now, obviously, they're not supporting people for the rest of their lives. People get down on their luck, and then they get back on. They help them find a job, and they help them sustain themselves and whatever. But that's generally the vibe, and that's why they don't live by the secular kind of options of college and high school education. And I think they're concerned that if they would give their kids a higher level high school education, there are going to be things that just go against the Hasidic values, like reading Shakespeare, for example, in high school as like a higher level English, or whatever, any book, any novel, will have ideas and philosophies and just talking about things that are inappropriate according to the Hasidic lifestyle. And they don't want to expose their kids to that kind of thing, and they don't want themselves even to be exposed to that kind of thing. They view that as wrong, and they view it as, somebody should be a little bit more sheltered and a little bit more filtered with the kinds of experiences that they let into their life. And in addition, sciences that go against what they believe in fundamentalist Jewish practices would be wrong. They don't want their kids having like sex ed or gender studies or things like that. I think there's like a right time and place for that. I think if a kid was getting married, then okay, we would educate the kid, not we, but meaning Hasidim would go and educate their kid. Okay, this is the female body parts, this is the anatomy, this is how it happens. But they wouldn't want them to be exposed to that in high school. Any sort of like biology like that. Now, while I was there, one of the books that we had that was like approved was the science book. It was a very interesting science book, which basically it would be like a few pages just discussing a random scientific topic, like electromagnetism, rockets, what else? Like plants, photosynthesis, random scientific topics that were like interesting. It would just be like a few pages. Each thing would be like a section of just paragraphs like describing it and basics and how it works and like keywords. That was kind of what it was. All right, so that's a basic rundown of what it was like working at a Hasidic school for me. I really had an amazing time, and in the next video when I discuss the New York Times article that came out, I will get into some more details and I'll discuss the article in a bit. So please subscribe, comment. I'm very curious to hear what you think. If you've been to a Hasidic school, maybe you have very opposing views. If you are Hasidic, then I'd definitely like to hear your thoughts, especially if you don't know me. I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts in the comments. So yes, secondly, when I get the infrastructure for a podcast, I am very excited to have at least one of my Hasidic friends on the podcast to sit down and discuss in much more detail the Hasidic dating style, which is called a basho, which is very interesting, as well as the impact that the Rebbe has in the community, as well as the impact of what are known as the askanim, or the people that kind of enforce community norms and run the charities and just keep the community operating functionally. So I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation. So should be happening soon, honestly. I hope to make it happen. And yeah, I'm excited. So subscribe, like, and